Evening, everyone. Hello. So, yes, we're going to be discussing Tory reform mergers. Now, just to be clear, judging by some of the comments in the chat as well, it's not a rhetorical question, by the way. This is not me going, okay, so what is to stop a Conservative Party and Reform UK merger? Oh, nothing at all. So that's what's going to happen. There are actually lots of reasons. And there's a couple been alluded to in the chat. I actually don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I just to be clear, what I'm going to go over here is the many reasons why there probably will not be a Tory reform merger yet. And that means before the next election. In the future, I do think there's a strong possibility. So why are we even talking about it? Because it is very topical, because yet again, the Conservative Party looking at the situation. Okay, at the moment, it's bad for Labour and the Conservatives, right? It's actually just bad. But the Conservative Party looking at the situation, and Jeremy Hunt was recently just saying that actually, yes, Reform UK are posing an existential threat. Conservatives at the moment see absolutely no way to come back to power without doing some sort of deal with Reform UK. And if you were to look at the polling at the moment and think to yourself, and without considering all the headway, as I say, there are lots of things that are contributing to today's polling, which will change in the next few years, both for Labour and against Reform UK. That's not being complacent, as I do think Reform UK are a massive problem for the future. But nonetheless, if you look at everything, you would still say that which party is likely to replace Labour as either a majority government or the senior party in a coalition, it's Reform UK, not the Conservative Party. So this is why it's topical. The Conservative Party at the moment, Kemi Badenoch clearly is useless. The knives are out for her already. But if you're a Conservative MP thinking, who should we get? There's an ideological choice between Robert Jenrick and James Cleverly. There might be a dark horse somewhere else. But you'd also be thinking, what difference does it make? What difference does it make? Because we're getting killed by Reform UK. And I just want to... So I'm going to go through some things, not just empirical thinking. We're going to go over things. We're going to have charts and blackjacks and hookers, but mostly charts. I'm going to start off with this, actually, because this is a good place to start, I think. Someone put up here, 14 years of the Tory party systematically destroying this country within 7 months. Nowadays, it'd be like 9 months now. A huge chunk, actually, no, it's more like 10 now, sorry. A huge chunk of them managed to jump ship, change the name of their party to Reform, and convince possibly millions of people that after 7 months, it's all Labour's fault. Which is very true. If you look at Reform UK at the moment, now, Nigel Farage himself, he can make a reasonable claim that he's never been a supporter of the Conservative Party. He sort of has in bits, but he's not like someone who was a Conservative Party supporter for years and years and then formed his own party. But he does openly say he is a Conservative, economically and socially. Economically and socially. He claims as his political hero, not just the likes of Enoch Powell, but Margaret Thatcher. He was delighted with Margaret Thatcher, remember. But it's not just Nigel Farage. Like, literally everyone in Reform UK that has had a party political past has been a Conservative. A lot. If you look at the councillors, the Reform UK councillors that were elected last week, now most of them were just completely new, which is why it's going to be not hilarious because it's going to affect people, but it is going to be remarkable to see how these greenhorns manage to run councils when they've got no experience. But of the councillors who have been in politics before, they're from the Conservative Party. They're from the Conservative Party. So what I want to do is start looking through some things. So there was some comments earlier on about whether Boris Johnson could be like a unity, a bridge between the Conservative Party and Reform UK. I can see where you're coming from. I don't think so, because you've got to think about this from Reform UK's point of view. What is Reform UK's big selling point at the moment? Why are they doing so well in the polls? And this is a big reason why a merger cannot be on the cards anytime soon. Because they are saying the Tories have failed and Labour are failing. Same with Brexit. That was the same mantra with Brexit. Labour failed, the Conservatives failed. Labour failed, Conservatives failed, so leave the EU. You know, it's like, well, whose fault is it, Labour or the Conservatives? Oh, yes, Labour and the Conservatives' fault, but leave the EU. Right, okay. Now they're doing the same thing. So if you try and get Boris Johnson to be a bridge with Reform UK, although his politics in some ways aligned, in some ways it doesn't. I am actually going to say, to be fair to Boris Johnson, some of his politics doesn't align with Reform UK at all. But if you're going to look at alignments, then Boris Johnson is associated with that Tory failure. He's the one, like Nigel Farage has, in order to stop saying that Brexit itself is fundamentally flawed, he has to say that it was messed up. Well, who messed it up? You can't say anyone other than Boris Johnson. It's not like Brexit was going swimmingly until they got rid of Boris Johnson. He will say that. Nigel Farage will not. So that won't work. But the other thing before we move on and just point out the similarities between Conservative Party and Reform UK, I just want to point out, it's not just that there's crossover in policies. There's crossover in policies with all parties, right? If you were to put every party's policies there in a Venn diagram, there will actually be some crossover where they all meet. Because there are some things that everyone agrees on, right? But with the Conservatives, I think those are two circles, two concentric circles. And I've just made a little list of them. People are, you know, add in your own. If you are aware of a Reform UK policy, throw it in there. I'm going to suggest there is not a single policy Reform UK have officially expressed that is not in line with the Conservatives. I mean, I've gone through a few. These are policies that they have expressed a positive view on since the election. Because what they said in the election, of course, can change. Like, you know, people are free to change their policies after an election, apart from the one that wins. So it's only Labour that's not supposed to change its policies now. Everyone else is free to. So first of all, anti-immigration, economic migration and asylum. So the Conservatives. They're anti-net zero. So the Conservatives. They're pro-big corporations, as are the Conservatives. They're in favour of private insurance modelling for the NHS. Nigel Farage keeps trying to insist that he's not talking about having people pay for the NHS, but he has been recorded even, and I know there's a video like going over 10 years ago, but even this year he's recorded talking about a privatised insurance model. He just claims that you can have this privatised insurance model and no one will need to pay anything for it. It's like, yeah. But pro-private insurance model for the NHS. Anti-workers' rights. They voted against all the measures in the Employment Rights Bill as it went through the House of Commons. So they're against. So, for example, banning forced 0 hours contracts. They voted against that. Banning fire and rehire. They voted against that. You know, paternity pay. They voted against that. So they voted against a whole series of workers' rights. They're anti-product standards. Nigel Farage has said he is in favour of a deal with the US that would mean we would, like Peter Navarro says, accept all of their products, that we wouldn't bar anything on a matter of standards, including the chlorinated chicken and hormone-fed beef. So that's what he's said. So, and that also. Now, the Conservatives haven't, I will grant you, they haven't explicitly said they're against these standards, but they have said that they're not happy Labour didn't negotiate a comprehensive trade deal, and we know that the comprehensive trade deal would require those lower standard food products from the US. So the Conservatives are, by implication, not explicitly, but by implication, also in favour. Pro-monoculturalism, by definition, being anti-woke means pro-monocultural. They're anti-human rights laws, both of them. Kemi Badenoch, it is true to say, is not in favour of leaving the ECHR. However, she is in favour of not having to listen to the European Court of Human Rights, and also anti-international courts in general. So they're going to have a big fuss about the ECJ at some point. So, I mean, and honestly, if anyone, I'm keeping an eye on the chat in case anyone has come up with another Reform UK policy, because this is not supposed to be an exhaustive list. Reform UK do not have loads of policies, but they have more than this. I just wrote these down as ones that they have specifically expressed a view on recently, since the election. And because I'm not assuming that all their policies at the election are still their policies. And not a single one of them is different to the Conservatives at all. So they are basically the Conservative Party, but a more extreme form of it. You know, a little bit like, I suppose the way you would describe it is a bit like Labour when it was under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, for example. Except even that was more muted, for example, because we know that Corbyn, even as Labour leader, did not, for example, say that we would withdraw from NATO, or a couple of other the policies that he really has. So actually, yeah, you would, but that's the closest I can think of as an example. How about this for radical idea? Ban all privately educated idiots from politics. Well, this is the problem is, of course, that democracy is supposed to be, you know, a government of the people, for the people, by the people. So you can't really exclude too many people from it. You can't exclude because of their background. I mean, if you were to go down that line, you might also say ban anyone who doesn't have like a university degree or something. You're banning people from different backgrounds. Now, whether you should maybe have a quota that says that the cabinet cannot be made of, that it has to be in proportion to educational background. But again, I mean, you can't really come up with artificial things like that, because who is to say what the criteria should be? So no, we just, what we need is a better, we need two things really. We need a better electoral system. We need an electoral system that is in tune with the way people want to vote. People don't want to vote tactically. A lot of people don't even think of voting tactically. So we come up with a system which means, I mean, there's no system where tactical voting will not help. But there are some systems where if the vast majority of people do not vote tactically, it'll still come out with the result that people mostly are fine with. Speaking of which, so this is what we're going to go on to. In fact, let's jump ahead a little bit. So there's a particular chart. I've used this before because this is from last summer. So in the wake of last year's, but there's more updated polling. This is why I'm putting this back up. I don't get royalties for it. It's not mine. It's more in Commons. But there is some updated polling from YouGov, which is quite interesting. So this was from just after the election. It polled Reform UK, Labour and Lib Dem voters, some of whom, of course, will have come from the Conservatives, right? And he asked them, when can you see yourself voting for the Conservative Party again? So on the extreme left, you've got people going within the next few years. So these are people who didn't vote Conservative last year, but they are prepared to go back to the Conservatives. So again, I'm going to be speculating here. This is not like my firm analysis, but you know, what I'm going to say is the likely reason. These are probably people who weren't happy with the direction the Conservatives were going, but are saying if they change direction, they would be happy to go back to them pretty much straight away. Then there was the next one, the sort of slightly darker blue one, the greyish blue, like fortress grey type thing, who said 5 to 10 years. So these are people who are clearly saying, we're not going to vote for them at the next election either, but maybe the election after. So these are people who fundamentally do not believe that the Conservatives are going to change direction enough. And it's But the fact that they've said they would vote for the Conservatives in the future suggests they have a beef with the current big names in the Conservative Party. So they probably think they've got nothing against the Conservative Party as such. It's the people, the actual, the Rishi Sunak and Kemi Badnoch and James Cleverly and Robert Jenrick, all the people associated with that Tory failure. So they're basically saying, we want to give them a chance to get gone. Then you had some saying more than 10 years. So for these people, they don't just want the big names gone, they want a complete clear out, right? They're basically saying you need to completely refresh the Tory party. But then the very dark blue on the extreme right is never. As far as these people are concerned, the Conservatives are fundamentally broken. You can have a complete change of personnel. It doesn't matter. The Conservative Party itself now is dead to them. What you'll notice is 14% of Lib Dem voters think that they will just never vote Tory. 19% of Labour voters. 26% of Reform UK voters. So there's over a quarter of Reform UK voters will never vote for the Conservatives. Now, I've held this up as an example of why, and this, bear in mind, is just straight after the election. Like, there's a lot of people saying they're prepared to vote Reform UK now. Like literally double the ones who did vote for them in the general election. So it could be more or less pronounced. I'm going to suggest more pronounced, but I mean, that's not been polled. So what I'm going to say is, and I've held this up as an example before, if Reform UK and the Tories did try to merge together, they instantly lose those votes. Instantly. But there's been more up-to-date polling from YouGov. So this, sorry, my head's in the way of one, but it doesn't actually matter that graph so much anyway. Didn't really need it. So this posed various, it was actually asking about coalitions. Now, it was noting that there's a plurality of voters for every single party that would prefer it if the government was just a single party. Like, in other words, a lot of people in this country are not in favour of coalition governments, which is a bit of a shame because we're going to get them no matter what system we have in the future. I mean, it's going to become more of a key feature, whether we have first past the post or PR. But so it posed various possible coalitions, different combinations. So you've got there Labour and Lib Dem, Labour, Lib Dem and Green, Labour and Green, Conservative and Reform, Conservative Lib Dem, Conservative Green, Labour SNP, Conservative Labour, Lib Dem Reform, Labour Reform. It didn't put Reform Green because there's no point. And there's some very interesting results in here. Really interesting. The don't knows are reasonably consistent. It's give or take about 15. So, people who have a view on one coalition seem to have a view on the rest as well. What you can see here is none of them have a majority in favour. Like, if you look here, on the bottom left, I've done a chart of the net effects before I go over the other ones. And that Labour and the Labour, technically the Labour, Lib Dem and Green is slightly the most popular or the least unpopular because there's just as many people in favour of Labour and Lib Dem as Labour, Lib Dem and Green, 38% of people. But as you can see, although it's rounded off to nearest whole numbers, you can see from the way YouGov done the chart, it's 46% opposed to both of those coalitions, but a smaller 46% for the Labour, Lib Dem and Green. So the most popular would be Labour, Lib Dem and Green with 38% in favour and like net sort of minus 8-ish, minus 7.5, let's say. So I'm just going to get my little chart up, actually. There it is. The least popular is Labour and Reform UK. Now, here's what's interesting. I would have thought, and this is, again, like, this bears investigation. I would like to see some follow-up research on this. I don't think I'm going to, but I would love to. Because I want to just point out a few things that I would look at this, like, as an analyst. I would imagine that if you're going to present people with potential coalition governments, that whether people approve of them or not largely depends on whether they approve of any of the parties in the coalition. So the least popular one, being Labour and Reform, may make you think that those would be the two least popular parties, Labour and Reform UK. But that's not the case, because the most popular coalitions involve Labour, but also outside of those three Labour coalitions that are all reasonably popular, there's a Conservative Reform UK one. The Conservative Reform UK one is way more popular than the Labour Reform UK one. So it's like there's no evidence that Labour, from this, it doesn't make sense to suggest that Labour and Reform are individually the least popular and therefore the combination of them would just be the most unpopular coalition. So people are also thinking about how it makes sense. And the public are basically saying here, 74% of the public have said they would oppose a Labour Reform coalition. That's not just people who don't want either Labour or Reform in government. That is people in Labour who don't want to be with Reform. And that is people in Reform UK who don't want to be with Labour. And the same applies to Conservative and Reform. Those 59% of people are not people who are going, I don't like either Reform or the Conservatives. That will also include some people in Reform who don't want to work with the Conservatives and some people in the Conservatives who don't want to work with Reform. Reform Green would be a funny coalition, though. It would meet a lot of challenges. Because if I go back again to these Reform UK policies, I can't, not only, I don't think the Green Party would be in favour of any of those. In fact, I'm quite sure they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't at all. So, although I would say if I was to look down some Reform UK policies, I bet you I could find one that the Greens would be okay with, but it really wouldn't be very many. The crossover, the Venn diagram crossover between Green and Reform policies will be needing a microscope, quite frankly. I mean, that's why it won't have been asked, because it would have been utterly ridiculous. So, in terms of why, I'm going to put this back up because I think it's quite funny. Just the weird cascade of what people will accept. If we get a Reform Tory coalition, I'm packing my bags and moving to Ireland. Same if Farage somehow ends as a PM with Reform winning outright. Well, I wouldn't blame you. There was a time a few years ago, before I met my now wife, where with the way things were going, this is some years ago now, but I could see the way things were going. And I really did worry for life in Britain. And I was actually considering initially moving to Scotland, thinking, and then I thought to myself, that may not be far enough. And I did actually myself think in a few years I might need to move to Ireland. But then I'm sort of like, I have now, at the time I had no roots, but now I do. So, I'm stuck. So let's hope it never gets that far. I actually do think there's good reason to believe, by the way, I will just say that I don't think Nigel Farage will ever be Prime Minister. Now, if you think that's crazy, let me just explain my reasoning here. I've got several bits of reasoning. First of all, and I've said this before, there's just age. It's just age. Nigel Farage, I do not believe is going to power to government in the next election. I really don't. I'm not going to keep going over the various reasons, but remember, this central selling point of Reform UK is the Tories have failed and Labour are failing. In a couple of years' time, although Labour might well still be failing on the communications front, I still retain some hope, not expectation, but hope that... See, one thing Starmer, to be fair to him, does do is he does recognise when something's not working well. Unfortunately, I don't think he's got the right people to tell him how to change it for the better. But we know he's ruthless and he will keep changing things. So he will not just keep telling himself that the communications is fine when he's not. He may never change it for the better, but he will keep changing things when it's failing. So I have some hope, at least, that they will get better at comms as they get more experienced. We will see. But they will certainly be delivering on some of these things that are very popular, because again, I'm just going to have to keep going back to this Reform UK thing. If we look at these policies, never mind in terms of like Conservatives and Green Party, but in terms of the public. So the anti-immigration stuff, yeah, we know that chimes with the public. The anti-net zero stuff absolutely does not. It doesn't. The pro-corporation stuff is largely neutral. A lot of people are neither for nor against. The private insurance model for the NHS is a big one. You know, Nigel Farage keeps denying it, even though he's recorded saying it. So that is a big no-no for the public. The anti-workers' rights, that's a huge no. People are in favour of those. That's very popular legislation. That's going to be passed. The anti-product standards, again, that is something that Labour, if they sort themselves out, and the Conservatives, but the Conservatives are less likely to do it, can beat Reform UK over the head with. The monoculturalism thing, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, if you identify key voters, those key swing voters, a lot of them are not particularly tolerant people necessarily. But again, if you change the electoral system, you can change that dynamic. Anti-human rights laws, again, Farage will never say he's anti-human rights laws. He'll just say they should be decided in Britain and that we'll have a British Bill of Rights to replace them. You know, they won't, but that's what they'll say. An anti-international court. So some of these things will chime with the public. But the anti-net zero stuff doesn't. The private insurance model for the NHS doesn't. The anti-workers' rights doesn't. The anti-product standards doesn't. So those are four things straight away that Labour can push. Now, in order to do that, obviously, if we go down the list, Labour have to deliver on their green agenda. And when I say deliver, I don't just mean in terms of the cleaner energy. I mean in terms of the jobs. That's what's crucial. Again, I keep seeing people criticising the investment in carbon capture because, oh, improving. It's like, well, yeah, it's for jobs. It's for moving jobs into green tech. In terms of the NHS, again, for Labour to make a real fist of that, they need to make sure that the NHS is seen to be a lot better at the next election. In terms of the workers' rights, I mean, a lot of workers will suddenly notice they've got better rights, but Labour would also do well to publicise it as well. And the product standards, again, you know, if Labour can do some trade deals which get economists saying, yes, this has definitely improved our economy, then again, Labour will be able to say we've done that by raising our product standards. Because remember, Labour are talking about aligning standards with the EU. That means effectively raising them. So if they can tie that to economic and trade benefits, then they can hammer Reform UK on their race to the bottom, as they call it, as well. Let's just catch up with some comments before I go on. They're saying, I can't possibly see Greens and Reform sharing the ground. There's always something. Like, literally, there are some things that everyone just agrees on. Like, in theory, Reform UK and the Green Party are in favour of supporting Ukraine. So there's always crossover. You can always find common ground with people. It's just that there's not a great deal of it. Was 2019 the worst in UK politics? Johnson became PM, had unelected leader of the opposition, seemed to be very little hope. No, it's gotten much worse now. It's much worse now. 2019 wasn't even the start of it. 2019 is when it became very obvious that politics in this country had changed. And it has. It's not going back, by the way. We are in a new era of politics. There's multiple very crazy things have happened to the point where now it is impossible to go back. So, and this is why, again, if politics, like Labour keeps saying they want to restore trust in politics, they're trying to do it with a fundamentally unworkable model in our current electoral system. I really do believe, like, you know, there's lots of reasons why I'm in favour of a representative electoral system. The chief one I'm always open about. Lots of people have different reasons. The chief one for me is I do not want any party. Basically, I don't want a narrow interest party, whether it be a party or a part of a party, but I don't want a narrow interest group having all of the power. That's what I don't want. Like, if a majority of people say, yeah, we do want a conservative reform government, okay, so be it. But I'll tell you something else. So people worried about Reform UK with PR, you shouldn't be, because they will never first of all, there's never been a time where over 50% of people in this country have voted for anything like that. Never. And it's not going to happen. But let's say it did happen. Let's say they got 52% of the vote and then roughly 52% of the seats between them, right? Let's just say they're not governing on that. That's not enough of a majority. They'll have fights all the time. That's not enough. They will actually have. I mean, look what happened to Theresa May. Granted, she had a minority. It was a large minority. But does anyone really think Theresa May would have won those votes in Parliament if she'd have had an extra 20 MPs? Because that's what you'd be talking about. You'd be talking about, a majority of maybe 12 seats. That doesn't keep your rebels in line. Absolutely impossible for a proportional representation system or anything like it to produce a government of Conservative stroke Reform UK MPs with enough numbers to keep their rebels in line. And I'll tell you something else as well. Reform UK will have a lot of rebels because they're nuts. Wang Peg saying a lot of fear that Labour are going to move right to battle over Reform UK voters. How likely do I think this is? In what ways, if so? So again, I am just going to have to keep emphasising the fact people keep using right incorrectly. So what they mean is socially conservative. Right and left are about economic policies. None of Labour's economic policies are right wing. None of them. They've all shifted left. There's nationalisation policies. They've actually carried out some nationalisation. That's left. They've boosted workers' pay and pension pay above inflation. That's left. They've taken more, even where they haven't nationalised, they're taking more direct control through regulation. So they are now much more tightly regulating the water industry. It's not being nationalised, but it is being more tightly regulated. That is a shift to the left. They've got rid of NHS England. They're bringing the NHS in England back into the Department for Health and Social Care. All of these are moves to the left. There's not been a single move to the right. The problem is people keep talking about social policy as right and left when it doesn't make sense to do so. It's based on an assumption that if you are left-wing economically, you are also socially liberal, but that's bollocks. Can I introduce you to Joseph Stalin? So what you mean is, I think, socially conservative. Yes, Labour are clearly moving to socially conservative positions. They've made a conscious effort. It's not just that they've decided to do it in a few random. I thought at first they were doing it in a couple of seemingly unrelated ways. It's now obvious to me that they're making a definite pitch for people who are left-wing but socially conservative or illiberal. Yes, and the reason they're doing so is because that's a large chunk of voters who all basically want the same thing. Whereas when people talk about this glut of voters who are on the left and liberal, it doesn't actually exist. You add them up and there are a lot of people who are left-wing and liberal, this is true. However, they don't all want the same thing. So Labour have clearly looked at it, whether rightly or wrongly. I think in some cases wrongly, by the way. I've said that before. They've clearly looked at it. Is benefits cuts a socially conservative policy? So that's not an economic policy, though, even though it is to do with the budget. Left wing is basically about government control of something. So that's a social policy. Benefits are a social policy, even though it comes down to money. So again, it is a socially conservative policy, yes. Again, Chris, they're saying reducing or restricting welfare entitlements for the sick and disabled is a shift to the right. It's not. Because like I say, the left economic policy is about, left wing is about the government overseeing things. Right wing is about the market overseeing things. Benefits doesn't come into it either way. It's a social, benefits is a social policy. It has an economic impact, granted, but it doesn't, it's like, are you saying that the balance of power with the benefits cuts has shifted into the private market? Like, where does the private sector come into it? It doesn't. So it's not, that is purely a social policy. UK Med, trust your opinion when it comes to thinking Labour will win the next election. My God, it's nail biter with each mistake they make. It is. But again, you're looking at the situation, you're thinking, I'm thinking to myself, some of what Labour are doing is very popular. Now, they still have to do it. There is still an issue of competence. Labour could still mess it up. The employment rights bill, I mean, that's just legislation. Everyone seems happy with it. That seems fine. Getting the NHS fixed. I mean, yes, progress so far has been very good. But, I mean, Wes Streeting could cock it up. You know, in terms of GB Energy and all the energy investment, Ed Miliband might cock it up. In terms of housing policy, Angela Rayner could cock it up. Like, I can't say for certain that they're competent enough to do it. All I know is that they are putting serious efforts into all of these things which are essential. And given that they really want to do it, I think they're likely to, I think Keir Starmer is likely to keep a very careful eye on progress and intervene if he doesn't think there's enough progress. I'm not excusing Labour's shift to socially conservative positions, by the way. Some of them I accept, like the position on economic migration I accept. Even though I really do think they should do a better job of splitting up types of economic migration, because we're hurting ourselves economically by shutting out university students. I don't think anyone who's against immigration has an issue with university students, or I don't think Labour voters do. The same with the trans rights. I've already made my point on this. Labour could have backed trans people without losing any votes, because although, yes, a lot of people are transphobic, they're not going to use their vote on it. There's some other issues as well, where I think it's not just, but I do think they're getting it strategically wrong. But at the same time, the reason is they're looking at the situation thinking, they know the vote is fragmented. They know they have this really tentative coalition. They know that they're going to lose some of it at the next election. So they have to win new support. And by far, and they also know they can only, via the mainstream media, get through to two or maybe three types of voter. That's it. You know, we've had in the past, like the likes of Mondeo Man at the last election, we had Whitby Woman. You know, you have these little terms for types of voter. You can only get your messages through to so many. I would argue they could get their message through to more if they use social media more. But anyway, that's a separate topic. See, libertarian versus authoritarian is as much. So libertarian isn't necessarily the opposite of authoritarian. Libertarians are libertarians are liberal, but they're selectively liberal. So authoritarian is the opposite of liberal, not libertarian. Libertarians are people who want a privileged elite to not have any restrictions on the way they live their life, but they do want the masses being restricted. So libertarians are not liberals. They're only liberals selectively for certain people. So they believe the rich and powerful should not be beholden to laws, but they think that ordinary people should actually face very tight laws. So you're thinking people like Boris Johnson. So the opposite of authoritarian here would be liberal. Daniel there said, I had a taste of American healthcare. I went to New York in 2019. I buggered my back carrying heavy luggage to the subway. 2-hour ER visit cost me $2,800. Managed to get it back through travel insurance. So what happens in America, for those who don't know, it's not just that it's a privatized health insurance system. It's worse than that. Like Germany has effectively a privatized health insurance system, but it's one that's tightly regulated. In America, so what happened in America many years ago is, so think about this from a health insurance company's point of view. So they want to sell you health insurance. Like any insurance, they ideally want people to buy it who aren't going to need it very often because they don't want to pay out, right? But in order to sell their product, which then again, they're marketing mostly at people who don't need it. They're not marketing at people who have health problems because that they don't want them people. So they're marketing it at healthy people, right? So those healthy people might get it in case they suddenly have an injury or an illness, but they don't want to pay a lot for it. So the health insurance company wants to make out it's giving you a good deal. So what they did, these health insurance companies got together and they went to hospitals and they said, can you charge basically 5 times as much, but charge us the normal amount? So the way it works is that $2,800, for example, your insurance company didn't pay $2,800. They paid about $500 or something. The hospital billed you for $2,800 because that's the deal with the insurance company. So the insurance company then sells you this health insurance, claiming they're giving you an 80% discount. It's an absolute con. It's a massive stitch up between the medical industry and the insurance industry in America. So yeah, the actual costs are way beyond the costs. Like the amount on a medical bill in America, unless you actually have no insurance and have to pay it, is not the amount the hospital expects to get. It's the amount they advertise so that health insurance companies can sell their health insurance. And both, both sides scratch each other's back. You say Starmer's a bit of a yes man, doesn't have a backbone. I mean, of the many things you can criticise him for, that is obviously not the case. Obviously not the case. He's been incredibly ruthless. He's attracted criticism for just how ruthless he has been. Criticised for it. The idea, I mean, you can criticise him for a lot of things, but saying he's got no backbone is fundamentally incorrect. He's actually been attacked for being too ruthless at times. But anyway, so I haven't quite finished. So going back to sort of the idea of Tory reform mergers. So in terms of reasons why it's very, very unlikely to happen, let's go through a few reasons, because the thing is, from the Conservatives' point of view, we know a lot of people in the Conservative Party would want it. We know Robert Jenrick would want it, and he might well be the next Conservative leader. Let's go through it from Nigel Farage's point of view. So first of all, Farage doesn't want to manage a real political party, remember. Ask yourselves why, I think I have explained this before anyway, ask yourselves why Nigel Farage did not honour his promise to turn over ownership of Reform UK to the members. The members do not control it. The members have no say on anything, right? In theory, they're introducing a rule that allows them to force a change of leader, but the conditions to do it are absolutely ridiculous. If those same terms existed in any other political party, no leader would ever have to step down. But the other thing as well is, even if that did happen and Nigel Farage wasn't the Reform UK leader, he would still control Reform UK, the organisation. And the reason for that is because of his bitter experience of UKIP. Because UKIP was a proper political party, as much as that might surprise people, but it had a normal political party structure. And he was constantly frustrated by the loony infighting, right? So when he made, first of all, the Brexit Party and then Reform UK, he basically determined he was going to have complete control of it. He wasn't going to deal with like infighting. He was just going to have the final say on everything. Now, if he were to merge with the Conservative Party, he couldn't do that. The Conservative Party is the larger organisation, even if he at the moment is in the superior position polling-wise. He'd have to effectively join with the Conservatives. So it would be the Conservative structure he would adopt. He won't like that. It also means it would be much easier to replace him as leader. In fact, he wouldn't even be guaranteed to be the leader. I don't see any way that Nigel Farage can do a deal with the Tories that means Nigel Farage is leader. Second, Reform UK's appeal, as I've said before, is that they are effectively an alternative to Labour and the Conservatives. So, and that appeal immediately collapses if you form any sort of strong agreement which preserves the Conservative Party. Remember, the reason why the Conservatives want to merge with Reform UK or have some sort of deal with them is because they think they cannot win without it. So the Conservatives are in the weak position. Big R Max just said there, Reform have been very active on Facebook lately. Was it Reform UK or was it Uncle Vlad? We never know. But yes, they are spending money hand over fist. It makes you wonder where they get it from. The other thing to note is, so as things currently stand, so if you think about a merger, so you could argue Reform UK don't need it. Like if the Tories continue to work under a shit leadership and Labour keep letting Farage dictate the topics of national debate, which they do, Reform UK can eclipse the Conservatives at least. And then in time, remember, Labour are going to lose power at some point. I mean, that's just inevitable. It doesn't matter whether it's in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. They're going to lose power. So that means someone else is going to win power. Who's it going to be? At the moment, you would say Reform UK. So Reform UK could say, at the moment, in terms of their polling, they don't need to form a deal with the Conservatives. They'll just destroy the Conservatives. But it is worth just considering something else as well. So where are we? So here's some polling. Again, this was from last year. This was just after the election. And this was for Conservative vote. So it's UK, they polled various people. General UK public, loyal Conservatives, Conservative to Reform switchers, Conservative to Labour / Lib Dem switchers, and Conservatives who just stayed at home last year. And they asked them on the prospect, who would you prefer to be the new leader between David Cameron and Boris Johnson, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, David Cameron, Nigel Farage. So in terms of the UK public, or when it says that, it says when it says David Cameron, it's not David Cameron specifically. Of course, he couldn't be leader again. It means someone with an appeal similar to David Cameron. So who would you want? A leader that's like David Cameron, a leader that's like Boris Johnson, or a leader that's, it doesn't even have to be Nigel Farage, just a leader like Nigel Farage. So they weren't even saying Nigel Farage, just someone like him. And in terms of the general public, the only place where Nigel Farage, in fact, he didn't win out on anyone, but the closest he came, going back to the Boris Johnson figure, was with Boris Johnson. So again, this just shows you there is absolutely no point the Tories getting anyone similar to Boris Johnson. Whereas a David Cameron type figure wins out. And this is from the general public. Basically, the general public are saying they would like, of the three types of Conservative leader, because this isn't about the individual personalities, just ones that are like them, they would like a David Cameron clone. Now, when it comes to loyalist Conservatives, this is where there's a disparity. They would prefer Boris Johnson over either Farage or Cameron. And that might sort of tell you something about where the Conservative Party is at the moment. That they don't want a David Cameron figure. They would prefer a Boris Johnson figure. Obviously, Conservative reform switchers would absolutely love a Farage figure. But, there we go. Do I think Johnson realistically will be back, as any leader would not allow unless they're truly spineless? Yeah, so I find it difficult to believe. I do believe the Conservatives would like Boris Johnson to come back. I absolutely believe a lot of them would welcome him back. But you've got to think about the mechanism for him to come back. And he does want to come back as well. But how do you arrange it? How do you arrange it? Because he's not in the House of Commons. In theory, he doesn't have to be. It's not a law of UK politics that you have to be an MP to be leader of a political party. It is a rule of the Conservative Party. So the Conservative Party would have to change the rule, which they're not going to because the leader wouldn't do it. The easiest way to do it is give him an easy by-election. Pay someone off in a safe Tory seat for him to win it. The problem becomes there may not be any such thing as a safe Tory seat. Like, if you think about every Conservative seat at the moment, okay, at the moment you would think it's probably not vulnerable to Labour. If the Conservatives won it last year, Labour probably aren't taking it off them anytime soon. Although we are thinking in 2 years' time, remember. This is in 2 years' time. But either way, you would think any Conservative seat right now is either vulnerable to Reform UK or vulnerable to the Liberal Democrats. So is there such thing as a safe Tory seat for someone to stand down in return for letting Boris Johnson back in? Then you've got another problem. So let's say they do stand down, triggering a by-election. The current Tory leader would have to be allowing Johnson to stand as a candidate because they can block it. They'd have to allow it, knowing full well he's coming back to replace them. So that's not impossible, by the way. But that leader, what would have to happen is that leader would have to be a willing conspirator. So I suppose the way it could happen is, so the Tories leave Badenoch in place for another year. Then they have another terrible local elections. Then Boris Johnson, on the quiet, they give her the tap on the shoulder but says, but can you do us a favour? We don't want generic or cleverly. Could you do us a solid and facilitate Boris Johnson's return? And then you can step down and he'll replace you for the good of the party. And so that might be, I could see that potentially happening. So it's not impossible for Johnson to come back. But I just look at the situation and I think, is there such a thing? Because first of all, I mean, you'd need a safe, it's not like you can pick any seat you like. The Tory MP would have to volunteer to step, you can't force them to step down. So you'd have to persuade them to step down for Boris Johnson for the good of the party or for some bribe. But there we go. When are you pagan, going back to the old left and right? If left and right are for economic scale, do I reckon up and down or inwards and outwards should be what we social? So up and down for social scale. There is a term called the political compass, which describes this. It's a two-dimensional thing. You'd only go in and out if you were going to come up with a third axis. So it is, yes, left and right is for economic policies, up and down is social policies. And as I say, left wing is much easier than people make out. It's really, it's like who manages things, who manages production, specifically production, products, who manages them. If the government manages it, that's a left-wing policy. If the market decides, that's a right-wing policy. Left and right is supremely simple, much simpler than social policy, because it's really easy to decide whether you're broadly on the left or the right. You can be a bit of both, whereas on the social scale, it can be quite tricky. Like, I am quite liberal in some areas and I'm quite conservative in others. For example, if you take like prison policies, because that's in the news this week with the prisons minister again talking about the fact that it's pointless to put certain people in prison for some crimes. So my attitude on that is, yes, I think there are some crimes for which it's pointless to send people to prison. You know, you punish them outside of prison. There's an economic cost with putting people in prison. There is an economic cost. It costs about £50,000 a year. So if you're going to put someone in prison who was doing some petty thieving because they're poor, it would literally be cheaper to give them £3 a month tax free, and there would be no need for petty thievery, because £3 a month tax free is pretty handy, particularly in this part of the country. Send them up north, they'll have a great old time. So it's 50 grand a year to just look after an inmate, and when you, at the end of it, you've knackered their job prospects, so they're more likely to return to crime. You've also, like, if they haven't got family or anything where they're going to live, it's the same with someone leaving prison's the same as someone claiming asylum. Like, they don't get put up in 4-star hotels or anything. They're basically homeless. So it's ridiculous. So I'm quite liberal on that, but I'm conservative on the fact. But for some crime, because for me, prison is for people who either are recidivists, so they just keep committing crimes. Like, you've given them a punishment, hasn't worked, give them a punishment, and you got to the point where it don't matter what punishment you give them, they're just going to reoffend, right? So okay, lock them up. There comes a point where you go, look, okay, fine, in prison you go. But in terms of, like, first offence, shall we say, I think it should be for people who have committed a violent offence. And I also think that not only should prison as a first offence only be for people who've committed a violent offence, but I specifically think that it should be a custodial sentence. I don't think anyone who's committed a violent offence should, under any circumstances, have a suspended sentence. I don't think suspended sentences should exist, basically, is what I'm saying. I actually don't think they should exist. So from that point of view, I'm not liberal, because I think where a crime, if you can suspend a sentence, then for one person, you can do it for anyone in the same circumstances, in which case don't have a custodial sentence at all. Not sure you could sell that economic argument, Phil. Which economic argument? I was making, the prisons one's not an economic. Oh, you mean the 50 grand a year thing? It's a lot of money. And it costs the country more than 50 grand a year. So it's 50 grand a year out of the taxpayer funding. But because that person is now not working and not spending their money in the local economy, there's actually a bigger economic hit. The 50 grand a year is just literally what it costs the taxpayer. That doesn't take into account the economic cost of putting people in prison either. So if you can punish someone in a way that they don't like, so they'll think about not doing it again, but they can still go to work and spend their money in the local shops and everything, then that's what you do. My leaning towards the Norwegian model. Well, yeah, anyone I think would sensibly lean towards a model which has very low reoffending rates. We have sky-high reoffending rates. Our model is clearly bust. So yes, if you're going to copy another country, you copy some countries that, do you know what, have very low reoffending rates. However, I strongly suspect we couldn't copy like the Swedish or Norwegian models or anything like that, because it would be seen as mollycoddling in this country. In this country, we are really very socially conservative when it comes to law and order. Again, like I say, there are plenty of people who are liberal in some areas and very conservative in others, and I'm one of them. Not necessarily all at the same time. When it comes to law and order, people in this country are basically very conservative. Say a suspended sentence makes people think and discourages crime at little cost, disincentive to repeat offences. Now, what it does is it makes victims feel less safe, and future victims decide it's not worth going, because it's a lot. You know, you've got to think about everything that goes into it, particularly these days, the fact that there's a very low charge rate for a lot of violent crimes, particularly violent crimes by men against women. There's a very low charge rate. There's a very low, prosecution rate, and a very low conviction rate for a lot of very violent crimes. And then it takes a lot of time as well. So if a victim's looking at all this and then thinking at the end of it, even if their abuser or attacker is convicted, they could get out of prison, you won't go through with it. So then, no, but again, I accept that people have different views on this, but I do not believe that suspended sentences are a good thing. It's because even your own argument, these people will then think about it. It's like, oh, they'll think about not raping or murdering someone again. Good. Again, it's a line of thinking that takes account of the feelings of the felon, the convict, not the victim. In a situation, if someone commits like a very violent crime, they've done that deliberately, a violent crime, they've consciously done it, the victim should be the one that gets the consideration, not the defendant, not the convict. And yeah, Vince there saying takes even longer due to the cuts to the criminal justice system from the Tories. Yeah, it can take years to come to court as well. Like the reason why so few very violent crimes ever come to trial is because unless they're some are fast tracked, some become like such a big matter of public interest that they're fast tracked. So you do sort of like, it's quite funny. So sometimes people don't realise, I think, the delays in the system, because they'll see news reports of an attack and then they'll see a few months later the court case and the conviction. For example, the Southport murder, yeah? That all happened within a matter of months. Why? Because it was fast tracked, because it was a matter of immense public interest. Whereas most of these types of offences, if it doesn't really register, it takes years. Huge delays. That ex-Labour MP got a suspended sentence for beating up a constituent. Was that fair? No. Either, I mean, I am going to say, when I say violent, that was a violent one. I'll give you that. When I was saying that, I actually meant like, when I said violent, I meant like putting people in hospital violent, or like we're talking rape, assault and battery, threats to people's lives. Because that is more serious than punching people. I'm not downplaying, like, you shouldn't have punched him. I'm not suggesting you go to prison for a brawl. But again, I also don't, if you're going to have a custodial sentence, then you go to prison, is my view. Because a suspended sentence is putting consideration on the convict, not the victim. We're on your pagan last one here because we're running out of time. With all the battle lines between the progressives and regressives being more clearly laid out, I actually think it's been more fuzzed up actually, but feel that the environment and green energy are going to be very core to the fight in the near future. See, I think it's the other way around. I think that the lines between progressive and regressives has been more blurred now because Labour are taking some regressive attitudes on social policy. But and it's the blurring of the lines that creates a huge problem there. So Labour are attempting a lot of really good stuff on green energy and workers' rights and the NHS and trade. They are doing, and housing as well. There's a few other things into the mix as well. And they're doing a really lot of good work on that. And my worry is that because of their social attitudes, the socially progressive people will look at it and take for granted the work on green energy and housing and workers' rights and the NHS and so on and trade, and decide that they're, and in their minds they'll think, oh no, I'm going to vote Green and Lib Dem, I'm not voting Tory. But if you're in an area where the Lib Dems and Greens can't win, you are absolutely voting Tory. And we end up with a Conservative government again because people, I'll give you a parallel. And I've used this example before. Do you remember years ago where Jacques Chirac, the French president, was up for re-election, and he was up against Le Pen Senior, not Marine Le Pen, her father. And so that was obviously a disaster for the left wing in France, right? The final runoff was between a right-wing arsehole, Jacques Chirac, who they were not happy with at all. You know, if people think they're pissed off with Macron right now, Jacques Chirac really pissed people off. But at the same time, he was up against a far-right fascist in Le Pen. And what the progressive left did in that election, if people remember, is in stark contrast to the way some people have behaved in America and Britain in the last couple of years. rather than saying Jacques Chirac's a total dickhead, he deserves to lose our votes, they never had it in the first place, quite frankly, they actually urged people to vote for Jacques Chirac. The campaign slogan, obviously in French, was vote for the crook, not the Nazi. So that was a case at that time of the French left, not necessarily the whole left wing, but generally speaking, the left, who had no candidate. They had no candidate. They had a choice between a right wing and a right wing authoritarian. Well, actually, two right wing authoritarians, but one was worse than the other, right? They had a choice between two dickheads, and they didn't just go, well, that's a crap choice, I'm not engaging. They recognised that one was much worse than the other and actively urged people to vote for the one that was not as bad. And you contrast that with what happened in America last year, where a lot of people, because the Democrats were failing on some progressive issues, effectively urged people to abandon Harris and say, well, it's her fault for not like taking this line on this, that or the other, and let Trump in, who was much worse. And we might do the same in this country. I don't think at the next election. I mean, you can never be certain. It's madness to predict anything these days this far ahead. But I don't think it will happen. But I can see it happening the election after. And not because Labour fundamentally shit the bed as such, but because we have a significant number of voters who are unwilling or unable to distinguish between the options they have. You say you can't reward parties for policies you're implacably opposed to. That's the wrong way of thinking about it. You're not rewarding them. These people are fine. Keir Starmer, are you punishing him if he loses the election? Is that a punishment for him? Are you having a laugh? He's had an incredibly successful career. He's a knight of the realm. He's a multimillionaire. He's fine. He's absolutely fine. He can do whatever he likes if he loses an election. He's not going to go crying in a corner. Same with the rest of them. It's not a reward. You're not rewarding them by letting them win the election. You're rewarding people. This is about people. If you fundamentally believe, because the alternative to Labour, I am telling you, the next government in this country, if we don't have electoral reform, if we have electoral reform, the next government could be a Labour Lib Dem or a Labour Lib Dem Green. That's possible. Without electoral reform, the next government is a Tory reform merger of some kind, in some form. Whether that is because all the Tories just defect to Reform UK or there's some formal pact or a formal merger, the government that replaces Labour is a Tory reform government. That's guaranteed. That is absolutely mathematically certain. You are not going to get a massive swing. I mean, even the swing that happened in Canada, people had never seen anything like it in the polls, but that was just from one party to another. That wasn't a huge swing of voting behaviour changing, the sort that you would need to wipe out Labour but somehow leave in a Lib Dem Green coalition. That's never happening. So so it's not it's rewarding the public. You've got to decide. You can decide what's best for you. You can vote for what's best for you, or you can vote for what's best for the country. But either way, if you don't vote tactically, and you don't have to, you vote whoever you like. I never tell people how to vote. But if you don't vote tactically, you are basically saying, if anyone's going to stop the Conservatives and Reform forming power, it ain't going to be you. And you know, and it's not a nice way of looking at it. It's not. All my life, I voted Labour. I didn't vote Labour in the last thing, but you know, I've supported, shall we say, voted in a way to encourage Labour government all my life. Do you think I'm happy? 80% of their policies I think are wrong, but 20%'s not bad. 20%'s better than zero. In fact, with the Tories recently, I felt that I've had -10. But anyway, we'll have to call it there. We've gone well over. Sorry about that. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Really good discussion. Have a great rest of evening, and until next time, I'll see you later.